Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. Joining in is John Iadarola.
Hello, Anna.
Hey, John.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How's the damage report?
It's going well. We had a good weekend.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Make sure you check out John's show, Damage Report.
Oh, especially Wednesday, where we're going to be joined by Representative Ro Khanna, who's going to break down his effort to stop all-out war with Iran.
Very nice. In fact, we're going to talk about Iran quite a bit on today's show for obvious reasons. Lots of different news stories broke over the weekend and today in regard to Iran. So we'll talk about that and more. There's some good news out of New Hampshire and Iowa for our preferred candidate. And I say
Michael
our,
Bennett.
because John and I have both endorsed Bernie Sanders. So we'll get to that story in the second hour of the show. But before we get to all of that, I do want to make a few announcements. First, let me start off by saying that aspiration is where it's at. If you're looking to put your money in a financial institution that actually invests ethically, they will not put your money in any type of shady industry, including the fossil fuel industry. And it's a great way to start off your new year in an ethical fashion. So if you're interested, go to aspiration.com/TYT. They also give you some extra perks and rewards if you shop ethically using your debit card. So check them out. All right, with that said, let's talk about Iran.
As you know, the Geneva Conventions outlaw attacks on cultural objects and places of worship. Our own DoD war manual discusses protection of cultural property. So why is the president threatening Iran with war crimes?
And that is exactly what Donald Trump did over the weekend in a series of tweets. He threatened Iran if Iran had the audacity to retaliate against him and his assassination of the country's top military commander. Now, that was a story that broke last week, but unfortunately the situation has further devolved over the weekend. Now, in a series of tweets, Trump said, quote, "Iran is talking very boldly about targeting certain USA assets as revenge for our ridding the world of their terrorist leader who had just killed an American and badly wounded many others, not to mention all of the other people he had killed over his lifetime, including recently hundreds of Iranian protesters. He was already attacking our embassy and preparing for additional hits in other locations. Iran has been nothing but problems for many years. Let this serve as a warning that if Iran strikes any Americans or American assets, we have targeted, and he's very specific here, 52 Iranian sites representing the 52 American hostages taken by Iran many years ago, some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture. And those targets and Iran itself will be hit, and this is of course in all caps, will be hit very fast and very hard. The USA wants no more threats." So again, this is in response to Iran threatening the United States following Donald Trump's decision to assassinate the top commander of Iran's military. Now, in order for the executive branch to unilaterally go about doing something like that, they need to prove that the target was an imminent threat. Our intelligence has not proven that. The Trump administration has not proven that. And while, of course, everyone knows that Soleimani, the target who was assassinated, was a bad guy, the fact of the matter is there are many bad guys throughout the world that we do business with. And in this case, we need to think about strategy and how Donald Trump's actions could lead to a domino effect and further escalate tensions among the United States and the Iranian government.
Yeah, it's sort of like we're playing a game of how many war crimes can we commit in 1 week, basically. They trotted out like almost an insultingly feeble case for why they desperately needed to kill him at that time in that place. That has fallen apart in as many possible ways as an excuse could. And we saw that New York Times reporting over the weekend about how about a week before, there had been a desire from Trump to have some sort of reprisal for the attack that killed the American defense contractor. And so they gave him a range of options, with the most extreme being killing him. And he originally turned it down, and he was thinking about other things. And then he got mad when he saw the protesters outside the American embassy, and then decided to go with that option. None of that is consistent with he was about to do something, we had to take him out.
Correct.
Then why would you go through all that rigmarole leading up to it? You wouldn't do any of that. And so it's almost like he's trying to distract us from the crime of launching us into a potential war in an unjustified fashion without alerting Congress by promising to commit future crimes.
That's exactly
that almost certainly he'll be pushed into the position of having to make good on, because the idea that Iran isn't going to do anything seems hard to believe. And so when they do, he's now made this promise. He either has to back off the brink or commit further war crimes.
And knowing how Donald Trump easily gets goaded into extreme positions, like for instance, assassinating the top commander for Iran's military, this doesn't look good. But I wanna be clear, right now there's a lot of speculation as to how Iran will retaliate. I'm not saying to avoid taking those threats seriously, but we don't know how Iran is going to retaliate. We don't know if they're gonna retaliate through direct military action or if they're gonna just rely on what they've been doing, which is attacking the United States through their proxies. Now, let me give you some details into why this would be a crime, a war crime, if Donald Trump and the US government attacked or targeted some of these cultural sites. Destroying cultural sites could violate international agreements such as the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. With that said, George Stephanopoulos talked to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and asked about it. And here's Mike Pompeo making a very unconvincing argument about how the Trump administration is not going to break any laws.
Yeah, we'll behave lawfully. We'll behave inside the system. We always have and we always will, George, you know that. The president was getting to this point. In the past, previous administrations had allowed Shia militias to take shots at us, and at best, we responded in theater, trying to challenge and attack everybody who was running around with an AK-47 or a piece of indirect artillery. We've made a very different approach. We've told the Iranian regime enough. You can't get away with using proxy forces and think your homeland will be safe and secure. We're going to respond against the actual decision makers, the people who are causing this threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And
that's not what Trump said.
That's not what Trump said. So we're gonna show you some evidence. We've already shown you some, but I'm gonna show you further evidence showing that the messaging, as always, is inconsistent between Donald Trump and members of his own cabinet. And luckily, George Stephanopoulos did push back a little bit in this interview. And so let's take a quick look at that.
So just to be clear, when the president said he had 52 Iranian sites, including sites important to the Iranian culture, that wasn't accurate?
George, I've seen what we are planning in terms of the target set. I'm sure the Department of Defense is continuing to develop options. The American people should know that every target that we strike will be a lawful target.
And again, I want to reiterate what Donald Trump initially tweeted was very conflicted with what Mike Pompeo said in that interview. And then later, when Trump was asked again about his threat to target 52 cultural sites in Iran, he decided to double down. And he said, quote, "They're allowed to kill our people. They're allowed to torture and maim our people. They're allowed to use roadside bombs and blow up our people. And we're not allowed to touch their cultural sites. It doesn't work that way."
Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
I also want to be clear, the way that some of the war hawks in the United States present this makes it seem as though the United States is never the aggressor, that we don't kill and maim people in other countries. But if you thought that Obama's drone wars were terrible, get a load of how Trump has expanded those drone wars and has further assisted Saudi Arabia in the genocide in Yemen. So don't buy into this notion that the United States is full of like these peacemakers that are just trying to push for democracy around the world. In reality, the United States, under the Trump administration especially, has been the aggressor, which has led to the flare-up in tensions between the US and Iran, and now Iraq as well.
Yeah. And think about what a bizarre frame of mind you have to be, what a bizarre worldview where you say, and we're not allowed to touch their cultural sites? Why do you want to touch their cultural? What is the purpose of a war? And in a war, what is the purpose of military action? He seems to believe it's, oh, they have something and I want to break it. They have this thing that they like and I want to break it. Not I want to degrade their military ability, take away their ability to stop our planes from occupying their airspace or take out soldiers that are advancing on our position. No tactical or strategic value to it. He just wants to break something. And so when I go on Twitter and I say that this is, like Fox is not just interested in a war with Iran, they're interested in an explicit war on Islam. This is what that looks like. It's, oh, this Islamic country has things that they like that are important to their culture and their religion. We want to break them. It doesn't matter if it has anything to do with their military. And by the way, The thing about hitting a cultural site is that's not where generals hang out. That's where civilians hang out.
Right.
And so what they are saying is we want to kill civilians and do damage to them. It is a terroristic threat. That's all it is. And all across Fox News, it has been an encouraging, they could not be more excited at the possibility that he is going to dispense with these rules of engagement and just start wildly killing civilians, which is something he's been promising to do since he was running for the presidency.
Now, look, John, you and I and other hosts at TYT are very critical of people who just willy-nilly throw out words like terrorism, and you just used the word terrorism in regard to what Donald Trump is threatening here. Now, I think that terroristic threat is the perfect way to describe it, because the United States government was very critical of ISIS when it did the exact same thing, when it actually carried it out in Syria. So I wanna take you to a video featuring archaeologist Michael Dante, and he talked about how ISIS was destroying cultural sites in Syria, and he explains why they were doing that. Take a look.
Sources on the ground in Tadmor claim that there will be more of these ISIL destructions so that they can gain media attention and to take away some of the attention from their recent failures in other areas in Iraq and Syria.
You think some of it does have to do with failures? That's why they might be doing this?
Yes, I think sometimes that they're trying to control the message and to divert attention away from territorial losses to Kurdish forces in the north and in some other theaters in the conflict zone. It serves as a very powerful ideological tool for the organization for recruiting, and it's a form of psychological warfare, and ISIL believes that this type of destruction of pre-Islamic heritage is primarily targeting the West.
So when you are threatening to do to a sovereign country what ISIS did to Syria and Iraq, I mean, what does that make you? And so you have no moral leg to stand on. And every action that Trump has taken since the beginning of his administration in regard to foreign policy related to Iran has done nothing but escalate tensions and lead us closer and closer to war. In fact, his decision, and look, again, I just wanna be clear, right? All of these Democratic lawmakers are like, oh no, Soleimani was a bad guy, he was a bad guy. They always have to preface their statement with, he's a bad guy. Yeah, we got it, everyone knows he's a bad guy. There's a ton of bad guys throughout the world, but you have to separate that from, sound strategic foreign policy. And what Trump did has escalated the potential of full-blown war with a country that has military capability that is underestimated in our media right now, okay? 4 times the size of the Iraq military, their weaponry is much more advanced. This is not an easy thing that we would engage in. The only way this would be a quick war, as it's being sold to the American people in mainstream media, is if we were willing to drop a nuclear bomb on Iran.
Which he has expressed interest in multiple times.
Which is terrifying, right? So this is a disaster, and again, Trump isn't really thinking about strategy. He didn't even know who Soleimani was prior to winning the election.
Or probably the strike.
Or even right now. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he was still, in the dark about it. But I really want to drive this point home. Here's a CNN video from August of 2015 where they're talking about the destruction of cultural sites in Syria and Iraq done by ISIS.
The Bell Temple, dating back to the 1st century when Palmyra, the city of palms, was the crossroads between Roman and Persian empires. Yet it is no more, the UN has confirmed. This image is from last week when ISIS leveled a neighboring temple, Baal Shamin, named after a Phoenician god. They had long threatened to drag this vital trace of irreplaceable history into their world of destruction, and did with crude devices. ISIS's obsession with destroying what is dear to all other cultures has not stopped at property here. ISIS, many say, are in an obsessive competition with themselves to outdo their last ghastly outrage. It was with some relish they released a video of their elaborate dismembering of the Iraqi city of Nimrud and of Mosul's museum. Millennia of thought and endurance wiped away by a culture worshipping death and the seconds of dark fascination they can conjure with videos on social media.
I mean, we can just replace ISIS with, what Trump is threatening to do in Iran. How is that situation going to make anyone safer?
No, and we know it hasn't. I mean, we know that this has materially made it more difficult for us to fight with what remains of ISIS. They don't care. All their stated foreign policy goals, they say that's what they want, but even though this is producing the opposite of it, they don't care. They say they don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. They don't care. This actually makes it more likely that they'll have one. They care. It's the same as it's trolling people on Twitter. It's, I want to cause pain, that's it. I want to see people I don't like being hurt. And if it's insulting someone on Twitter, if it's bombing a cultural site, if it's killing civilians, it's all the same. We're not supposed to call these people deplorable. If Trump said, I will kill hundreds of thousands of civilians, Pete Hegseth would be defending him on Fox News the next day. All of them would. He wouldn't lose anyone. He campaigned saying, I'm gonna kill the family members of suspected terrorists. He promised on the campaign trail he would commit war crimes. He started doing it as soon as he got in office. He surrounded himself. His new sidekick is a guy who he wouldn't know if he had not committed war crimes. That's all it is. His son posed with that gun that had the Crusader helm like carved into it. They want crusades, that's what they want.
And all it's gonna do is, first of all, it not only breaks international laws, but it makes US troops abroad less safe. It deteriorates relationships that we've built with allies abroad, including with the Iraqi government. The Iraqi parliament has now voted to oust US troops from the country. I mean, the situation continues to devolve, and it's because you have a child as the leader of this country making decisions that are ignorant, that aren't fact-based, and simply based on impulse and emotion and his feelings. And it's terrifying because people's lives are literally at stake right now, innocent people's lives, because of his terrible decisions. Now, I do want to move on to a different part of the story, and it has to do with some of the ramifications here in the United States, if you do happen to be an Iranian American. So, Iranian Americans are reporting that they've been detained for questioning at US borders following escalated tensions between the United States and Iran. Now, of course, this follows the US government's decision to assassinate the top military commander in Iran, Qasem Soleimani. And so the reports are actually from Washington State. The Washington State chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, a prominent Muslim civil liberties group, said on Sunday that more than 60 people of Iranian descent, including American citizens, were held for hours-long periods of time for questioning over the weekend at the Peace Arc checkpoint in Blaine, Washington. So that's along the border with Canada. And the Iranian Americans who were coming back to the United States were apparently at some snazzy concert, an Iranian pop concert in Vancouver over the weekend. So they go to the pop concert, they want to come back.
Suspicious.
And as they're coming back, they get stopped by Customs and Border Patrol, and in some cases, they've been detained for 9 hours for questioning, right? And they get asked all sorts of inappropriate questions about their views on US aggression in Iran, or toward Iran, I should say. So a source at US Customs and Border Protection had reported that the agency received a national directive from the Department of Homeland Security to report and detain anyone with Iranian heritage entering the country who is deemed potentially suspicious or adversarial, regardless of citizenship status. And I want to be clear, many of these individuals who were detained for questioning were American citizens. Len Saunders, an immigration attorney in Blaine, said his contacts through CBP indicated that headquarters in Washington had ordered new vetting procedures, which appear to be directed toward people born in Iran that require port directors to sign off on admitting anyone held for questioning. Now, Border Patrol is completely denying this, even though there have been a few people who spoke to immigration lawyers and reporters on condition of anonymity. But there were examples of people who were detained for as long as 9 hours. I'll give you those details in a minute. But John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess we have to know more and to know, is this something that's going to continue and everything? I mean, nobody sees this story and is particularly surprised. I mean, look at how the suspicion with which people from that area of the world have been greeted since Donald Trump became president. That was one of his chief priorities, was blocking anyone from that entire stretch of the earth. And so, yeah, I have no doubt that they're gonna treat these people as if they're not American or they're suspect in some fashion, obviously. When really, like, if your goal is to figure out what do people really think, or is it possible they harbor dangerous thoughts? I say detain people in MAGA hats and ask them what they think about Trump wanting to kill civilians. Because if we're gonna be surrounded by people that think it's okay to target civilians in war, I would like to know what those people think.
I mean, we've seen Trump supporters target civilians in non-war situations, including at synagogues, mosques, churches,
exactly.
Walmarts, all sorts of places throughout the country. And as we know, through FBI reporting and data, right-wing extremism in the United States is extreme. It's unmitigated at this point. The Trump administration refuses to call it out for what it is, and people are dying as a result of that. But no, we're talking about US citizens, right? Like Donald Trump and the right-wingers who support him don't care about your citizenship status. They don't care if you're here legally. What they do care about is whether or not you fall under their very specific categories of what is deemed an acceptable American. If you happen to be of any other descent that they're unhappy with, they'll totally make excuses for this. They don't even apologize for it. It's incredible. These are American citizens. This shouldn't happen to anyone, okay? They're American citizens, though, who are being pulled aside, detained for hours on end, and they're asked specific questions about how they feel about Trump's foreign policy toward Iran. Okay, so let me ask you something. If one of these people who was detained said, I don't agree with Trump's aggression toward Iran, it's further escalating war in the region.
Then what?
Then what? What happens? Because this, in my opinion, I mean, I know I'm not like a constitutional scholar, but this goes against our First Amendment protections. We should be able to have our own views and exercise our own political speech in regard to how our own government is acting, right? And if we just sit by and allow this to happen and think like, oh, I don't know, like maybe it's happening, maybe it's not, maybe we just move on to another story. Like, how much are we gonna allow this stuff to progress?
Yeah, well, think about like we're talking about this story right now. Somewhere in the White House, what is Stephen Miller thinking about all this? Like, they already set up concentration camps on the border. You think that they would never round up people, American citizens? And I hope that in 6 months or a year, Donald Trump's out of office and anything we say now looks like crazy talk. Why were you worried about things? I would love to be wrong, but this is a fascist movement. There's no limits on what his base will support. I know I say this about a lot of things, but if they said, you know what, things are getting really tense with Iran, and we have unspecified intelligence that we're gonna evade any question about, and we think that we need to detain people and just figure it out over the course of a few weeks. What are they gonna bolt? Republicans, Lindsey Graham's gonna be like, nope, this is too far, I'm not with you, Trump. Marco Rubio is gonna ask tough questions of Trump. No, they would go along with it.
They would go along with it. I mean, you've seen the Republican Party, through the impeachment investigation, throw long-standing allies of theirs under the bus if they have any courage to speak out against Trump's actions, during this impeachment investigation. They don't care. They don't care. They care about their own political careers, and they know that speaking out against Donald Trump, just as Justin Amash did, means that you could lose your political career. And to them, that political career is much more important than the Constitution or protecting the rights of their constituents, including the First Amendment right that they cry and moan about every time a comedian is criticized too harshly in the press. Okay, so they feel much more passionately about protecting someone who wants to put out jokes that people don't like, as opposed to everyday Americans who should be able to practice their First Amendment rights. Anyway, I want to give you a specific detail or a specific individual who had tweeted about his experience. He's a historian. He specifically focuses on Iranian history. His name is John. It's an Armenian name, but it's hard to pronounce. Gazvinian. Sorry, I can't say it in like an English way because I'm Armenian. So every time I see it, I'm like,
I can't say it in anything but.
I know. But anyway, he had tweeted about his experience and it went viral. He said, well, just landed at JFK and no surprise, got taken to the special side room and got asked, among other things, how I feel about the situation with Iran. I wanted to be like, my book comes out in September, pre-order now on Amazon. Then he included a link to his book as well. Now, he said that the first CBP officer flipped through his passport and asked him, when was the last time you were in Libya? To which he replied, I've never been to Libya. The officer quickly corrected himself to say Iran. same country, not a big deal. To which he told him that he had last been there in 2009. He was then asked more questions in a private secondary screening. He said the first time he's ever been held up when returning to the United States. Now, he really underplayed the experience once the tweet went viral. He was interviewed about it on CNN, and he didn't want to make a big deal about it, but I can kind of understand why. I mean, when you're dealing with this level of fascist behavior from a government, you have a lot to lose, and it's terrifying. Like, he didn't expect that to go viral, but it's what he experienced, and I don't think he's lying about it.
Yeah, no, the Trump administration has bought itself absolutely no goodwill from the American people.
This is crazy. So that's what we're dealing with right now. I'm sure all those free speech warriors out there, the ones that were crying about Berkeley students protesting their conservative speeches on campuses are, gonna go out there and really fight for the rights of these Iranian Americans who are US citizens and literally did nothing wrong. Nothing. They didn't even do anything political. They just went to a concert.
They existed.
They existed.
Yeah.
That's all it took. Anyway, Dave Rubin is a disgusting coward. We got to take a break. We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment.
Welcome back to TYT. Anna and John with you. For our members, I'm gonna read a few of your comments now, but don't be afraid to send in your comments during the show. I'm gonna do my best to read some of them in the context of the stories we're covering, so we can include your opinions as we cover these stories. But for now, I'll read a few of them. Jay Hufford says, it seems there's a major dissension in the Pentagon about Trump's actions. First, we have reports that top brass were shocked Trump did that. You're right, that was a big story. And now the US military sent a letter to Iraq officials that we respect your sovereign decision to order our departure, which Esper had to deny. You're absolutely right. Apparently it was unsigned and unsigned and sent by mistake. Really, a letter like that gets sent to Iraq by mistake? Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of I see a lot of dissent within the Pentagon for good reason. It's not as though people working in the Pentagon are in favor of keeping Iran's top military commander alive because they think he's a good guy. It's about strategy, and it's about the type of ramifications that follow an aggression like that.
Yeah. Well, and also earlier today, Chief of Staff to Esper resigned. Ambassador to Afghanistan also left. So it's a time of confidence and stability in Middle East foreign policy.
Jesus Christ. Gabby Marita says Iran shouldn't be able to get away with using proxy forces. So will we be withdrawing our support of Saudi proxies fighting Yemen? Such a good point. Such a good point. I mean, look, we engage in proxy wars all the time. We did it in Syria. We're doing it in Yemen. There's no question about it. And Lieutenant McGee. Yeah, Lieutenant Mac McGee says, just donated using tyt.com/yes, you guys. All of you, even the ones behind the scenes we never get to meet. Absolutely, Thank you so much for donating.
That's nice.
And you know what? If you're interested
keep it that way.
in helping TYT, wait, what?
Edwin, he gave a signal, and I was like, yeah, let's keep it that way. Anyway, thank you.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna read super chats and then we'll move on. Little Mac says, I decided not to buy an appetizer during my lunch today. Not only does it help with my weight, those saved funds were used to make this chat and support to support TYT, the only truth tellers I know in news. Thank you so much, Little Mac. Craig Reeves says, if the Trump administration had conclusive evidence Soleimani was an imminent threat, they would have presented their case to Congress. You're absolutely right. The fact that they didn't should lead us to believe they were hiding something. I mean, all you really need to do is watch Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's interview with CNN last Friday. And every time he was asked to provide some details or some evidence, he got very uncomfortable. It was very noticeable. And so you're right, if they had evidence, if they had the intel, they couldn't wait to show it to the American people and make their case. But that's not what happened. And it's super suspicious, especially when you look at all the other news stories in the lead up to what happened last week. I mean, all of the different accusations that the US government lodged against Iran without any evidence. And then those accusations later faded into the ether. All right, let's move on to some other news. In fact, we're going to flesh out more of this Iran story. Actually, do we have a cold open? No, we don't. Okay. The repercussions in response to Trump's assassination of Iran's top military commander have begun. Okay, so the Iraqi parliament has actually voted to oust thousands of US service members that are currently stationed in Iraq. Also, President Trump, as we reported earlier, had threatened to bomb or destroy some of the cultural sites in Iran. And he is threatening Baghdad, Iraq, with sanctions if they push US troops out of the country. Now, why would Iraq want to push US troops out of the country when Iraq invited the United States to come help them defeat ISIS? Well, a little fact that I think is super relevant to these discussions, doesn't get mentioned often. The Iranian military, right, under the direction of the man that was just assassinated by Donald Trump, also assisted in defeating ISIS in Iraq. So you have US forces, you have Iranian forces, and you have the Iraqi government working together in order to defeat ISIS in Iraq. And so Iraq actually has the Iraqi government, I should say, has a decent relationship with Iran because there are some common interests there. And Donald Trump and the US government decided to do this drone strike that effectively assassinated the top commander of the Iranian military. And they did it without, working with Iraq, notifying Iraq. They just did it unilaterally. So that is a problem, and that's the reason why Parliament wants to oust service members. Also, hundreds of thousands of mourners packed Iran's streets to pay respect to Soleimani. That was the top commander who was assassinated by Donald Trump. I have more details, but I wanted to open this.
Yeah, and I would also say, look, they certainly will have concerns about long-term stability if they allow the US to stay in the region. I mean, any confidence that they might have had in Donald Trump's ability to prosecute this conflict or any conflict in the region is probably gonna be pretty shaken by what they've experienced over the past week. But in the short term too, if they expect that Iran is going to attempt to strike back in some fashion, the closest, easiest way to do that would be against US service members in Iraq. And there's an incredible likelihood that if they were to do that, there's the possibility of collateral damage against Iraqis in the area. So just having those American soldiers there potentially endangers Iraqis as well.
Exactly, and I also want to note, in an effort to garner more support toward this aggressive, foreign policy against Iran, the government keeps telling the American people that the people of Iran are very happy with what happened to Soleimani. Don't believe that for a second, because in that B-roll video that we just showed you right now, that was the hundreds of thousands of people who took to the streets to mourn his death. No, I'm not saying that to make Soleimani out to be some great person, but it's clear that what Donald Trump did here actually is counterproductive to his stated goals, because prior to this assassination, there were mass protests in Iran, and that is exactly what the US government wanted. So the Trump administration implements these harsh sanctions that cripples the economy in Iran. And the people start protesting. Obviously, they're hungry, they're angry with how the government is handling things. And then once Trump did this assassination, the entire country is united now.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing how little strategy Donald Trump has, how little knowledge he has, how he has no intellectual curiosity about the matter.
It is so uniquely 100% counterproductive to all of his and his supporters' stated goals in the region, which should lead one to believe that he is either uniquely incompetent or is lying about what his actual goals are. And unifying them against the US, that's bad if you actually want some sort of renewed, more pro-American diplomatic overtures, if you want a better version of the Iran nuclear deal, which he's been sort of implying, like it was too easy on Iran. But if what you actually want is war with them, this is just about the best thing you possibly could have done.
That's exactly right, and Iran has announced that they will now work on their their nuclear capability. Why wouldn't they? I mean, Donald Trump is the one who decided to pull out of the nuclear deal and then implement these sanctions. So at this point, especially with the aggression toward Iran, the country really has no incentive to avoid building any type of nuclear weapons.
And one reason that they were willing to stop was to get out from under previous sanctions. Well, the sanctions are on, and they weren't going for the nuclear weapon. So why have the sanctions and no nukes? Why not at least go for the nukes? And if you're worried that Donald Trump or some other crazed Republican could actually attack and try to invade the country, the nukes are the best possible deterrent you could have. So
I want to give you some news from the Iraqi prime minister who tends to agree with parliament in wanting US troops out. The Iraqi prime minister told parliament that Iraq was grateful for the assistance the US had provided in fighting ISIS, but he's now recommending that the 5,200 US troops stationed there permanently leave the country. The Defense Department officials said that because of attacks on Iraqi and US bases over the last 2 months, the US would be suspending support for Iraq's anti-ISIS operations and training of Iraqi forces. So there's a little bit of inconsistent reporting when it comes to this part of the story. So the Pentagon had initially sent some notification to Iraq indicating that they'd be willing to pull US forces out. And then later there was a statement issued saying that no, this was a mistake. We're just going to move some of the troops around. We're gonna reposition them. So it's unclear what they're really gonna do. But one thing that is clear is that the Iraqis do not want US troops in their country, considering how things have gone down. And then I want to give you one final response from Donald Trump. This is what he told reporters aboard Air Force One. If they do ask us to leave, and he's talking about Iraqis here. If they do ask us to leave, if we don't do it in a very friendly basis, we will charge them sanctions like they've never seen before ever. It'll make Iranian sanctions look somewhat tame. If there's any hostility, that they do anything we think is inappropriate, we are going to put sanctions on Iraq, very big sanctions on Iraq. So.
We're living a nightmare, but I don't even know what to say at this point.
Yeah.
I'm shocked he didn't threaten to bomb them, honestly.
It's so frustrating. It's frustrating that I mean, the Bush administration was a nightmare, and this just continues to devolve. Like, I didn't think things could get as bad as the Bush administration.
Like we've been saying for years, he's a madman.
Yep.
He's an actual madman.
And
that we've given more power than any other human ever on earth.
Yeah. All right, well, I do want to read a few member comments yes, I want to read a few member comments. And if you're interested in becoming a member and chiming in on our stories in real time, you can do so by going to tyt.com/join. Ann says, American imperialism for the lost. This kind of move creates the kind of people that become martyrs. And Soleimani, while he was a bad guy, is being mourned as a martyr right now. Super Bernie Bros says, it's funny how the right is accusing Dems of being unpatriotic because they oppose the assassination of Soleimani. They seem to forget that Dems were fine when al-Baghdadi was killed, and you're right about that. So it's not just about doing away with bad people around the world. It's about doing so in a strategic way that doesn't lead to further war. And what Donald Trump did with Soleimani will lead to more war, will lead to escalated tensions in the Middle East. And it's abundantly clear that he hasn't really considered that before agreeing to that drone strike that killed Soleimani.
And even with the leader of a terrorist group, you have to consider the likely consequences of taking them out. But we were in active war with ISIS, Al-Qaeda in the region, and other regions as well. Like, we're already in conflict with those people. It's not the same thing.
Right. All right, well, we got to take a break. When we come back, Fox and Friends chimes in on this whole situation. What does the bright and intelligent Ainsley Earhart have to say about it? We'll be right back.